Hello. Today I'm starting a three-part story. This becomes significant because it's Advent, and in Advent it's a waiting time. So the story is about a boy who's also waiting and waiting for Christmas, as we all are these days. I bring you the story of the Christmas Miracle of Jonathan Toomey by Susan Wojciechowski. In the village, children called Mr. Gloomy because his name. Let me start that over again. The village children called him Mr. Gloomy, but in fact his name was Toomey, Mr. Jonathan Toomey. And although it's not kind to call people names, this one fit quite well, for Jonathan Toomey seldom smiled and never laughed. He went about mumbling and grumbling, muttering and sputtering, grumping and griping. He complained that the church bells rang too often, that the birds sang too shrilly, and that the children played too loudly. Mr. Toomey was a woodcarver. Some said he was the best woodcarver in the whole valley. He spent his days sitting at a workbench carving beautiful shapes from blocks of pine and hickory and chestnut wood. After supper, he sat in a straight-backed chair near the fireplace, smoking his pipe and staring into the flames. Jonathan Toomey wasn't an old man, but if you saw him, you might think he was. The way he walked bent forward with his head down, you wouldn't notice his eyes, the clear blue of an autumn sky. And you wouldn't see the dimple on his chin, since his face was mostly hidden under a shaggy, untrimmed beard, speckled with sawdust and wood shavings, and depending on what he ate that day, with breadcrumbs and a bit of potato or dried gravy. The village people didn't know it, but there was a reason for his gloom, a reason for his grumbling, a reason why he walked hunched over as if carrying a great weight on his shoulders. Some years earlier, when Jonathan Toomey was young and full of life and full of love, his wife and baby had become very sick. And because in those days it was time before hospitals and medicines and skilled doctors, his wife and baby died 3 days apart from each other. So Jonathan Toomey had packed his belongings into a wagon and traveled until his tears stopped. He settled into a tiny house at the edge of the village to do his wood carving. One day in early December, there was a knock at Jonathan's door. Mumbling and grumbling, he went to answer it. There stood a woman and a young boy. "I'm the widow McDowell. I'm new in your village. This is my son Thomas," the woman said. "I'm 7 and know how to whistle," said Thomas. "Whistling is pish-posh," the woodcarver said gruffly. "I need something carved," said the woman, and she told Jonathan about a very special set of Christmas figures her grandfather had carved for her when she was a little girl. "After I moved here, I discovered that they were lost," she explained. "I had hoped that by some miracle I would find them again, but it hasn't happened." "No such thing as miracles," the woodcarver told her. "Now, could you describe the figures for me?" "There were sheep," she told him. "2 of them," said Thomas. And they had curly wool." "Yes, 2," said the widow, "and a cow, an angel, Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus, and the wise men. 3 of them, added Thomas. Will you take the job? Asked the widow McDowell. I will. I'm grateful. How soon can you have them ready? They will be ready when they are ready, he said. But I must have them by Christmas. They mean so very much to me. I can't remember a Christmas without them. Christmas is pish-posh, said Jonathan gruffly, and he shut the door. The following week there was a knock at the woodcarver's door. Muttering and sputtering, he went to answer it. There stood the widow McDowell and Thomas. Excuse me, said the widow, but Thomas has been begging to come and watch you work. He says he wants to be a woodcarver when he grows up and would like to watch you since you are the best in the valley. I'll be quiet. You won't even know I'm here. Please, please, piped in Thomas. With a grumble, the woodcarver stepped aside to let them in. He pointed to a stool near his workbench. No talking, no jiggling, no noise, he ordered Thomas. The widow McDowell handed Mr. Toomey a warm loaf of cornbread as a token of thanks. Then she took out her knitting and sat down in a rocking chair in the far corner of the cottage. Not there, bellowed the woodcarver. No one sits in that chair. So she moved to the straight-back chair by the fire. Thomas was very still. Once, when he needed to sneeze, he pressed a finger under his nose to hold it back. Once, when he wanted desperately to scratch his leg, he counted to 20 to keep his mind off the itch. After a very long time, Thomas cleared his throat and whispered, Mr. Toomey, may I ask a question? The woodcarver glared at Thomas, then shrugged his shoulders and grunted. Thomas decided it meant yes, so he went on. Is that my sheep you're carving? The woodcarver nodded and grunted again. After another very long time, Thomas whispered, Mr. Toomey, excuse me, but you're carving my sheep wrong. The widow McDowell's knitting needle stopped clicking. Jonathan's knife stopped carving. Thomas went on. It's a beautiful sheep, nice and curly, but my sheep looked happy. That's pish-posh, said Mr. Toomey. Sheep are sheep. They cannot look happy. Mine did, said Thomas. They knew they were with the baby Jesus, so they were happy. After that, Thomas was quiet for the rest of the afternoon. When the church bells chimed 6 o'clock, Mr. Toomey grumbled under his breath about the awful noise. The widow McDowell said it was time to leave. Thomas sneezed 3 times, then thanked the woodcarver for allowing him to watch. That evening, after a supper of cornbread and boiled potatoes, the woodcarver sat down at his bench. He picked up his knife. He picked up the sheep. He worked until his eyelids drooped shut. And Thomas and the widow McDowell went home to wait. And so we too will be waiting this Advent. And the next installment of this story will come next week. Thank you.